Next up, Jennifer Wigmore.
Hi, I'm Kate Ziegler. I'm really happy to have Jennifer Wigmore here today, ACTRA member, a one-term council serving ACTRA member.
Yes, yeah, I was on Toronto Council in the 90s.
We're going to talk about that because you told me something before we started rolling that I want to talk to you about. But you're doing this IPA negotiation for 2024.
Right.
The biggest team I think that we've maybe ever put together.
Exciting team.
And you will predominantly are you predominantly representing the category that you work in, or you feel like you're kind of like I'm here, you really trying to advocate in one
I think you have to represent everybody.
Yeah.
You know, you have to try and find the way to make sure that you're listening to every concern, even if I don't work in background or if I don't necessarily work in stunts, I'm still representing them at the table. And to me, that's very important because there's very limited people that can be at that table. And so even though we've got fabulous Shaq and we've got some other great stunt people on the team, I still have to be there for them and I still have a vote. So I think it's really, really important that I'm not just there representing the demographic of people that I represent, which is principal performers or working actors. Which is something I know quite a lot about.
Yeah, and which is going to give you insight in such a deep way, but being able to all stand together and recognize the importance of what it is to be in a collective agreement within the union, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like I want to dive into things, but right before we started rolling, you were telling me that the last time you were on, or when you were on council, there was someone on staff, and they are the reason that we got internet.
Yes.
Can you do you remember?
Well,
can you tell us?
I'm old enough to be on council when the internet kind of came into being, and we didn't have internet in our IPA because it was a new thing. It kind of reminds me of this agreement a little bit because, and sort of the reason why I wanted to be on the bargaining team was because it reminded me of that moment that we were advocating for something that didn't exist before, and nobody knew about it. ACTRA Toronto Council was very progressive at that time and thought we should have a staff member who can help us because we don't really even know what the internet is capable of, how it will impact us in the future. And so we hired somebody on staff to be the internet person, and I can't even remember his name. He was brilliant, and he knew a lot more about this stuff than we did. And he really trained us to see the potential of what the internet could be and how it will impact performers in the future. And it was because of him that we got internet into the agreement in the IPA that year, and that was new. It had never been there before.
And it still exists as new media.
And now that's a problem, right? Because we don't call it new media anymore, right?
It's just good old internet, or all media. All media
is media, you know, and more importantly, digital streaming, which is something that is now the extension of new media, is really the thing that we have to get into the agreement as a more clear and more carefully worded set of ideas.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. We know that SAG-AFTRA went through their strike last year, and part of what they were really trying to fix or make sure there was clear language around was in relationship to streaming and the residual model. And I know we're not going to get into specific proposals. I'm not going to ask you to be tell me the language, but I will just ask, as a performer who's been doing this for a long time and talking to, we're talking to our members here about what they can kind of tie onto. Are you feeling good about where we're going with, are there changes in the residual model that you're feeling excited about trying to fight for?
Yeah.
I guess.
That's a good question. I mean, I think the first thing that I would say is that we have to actually get digital streaming into the agreement because it clearly doesn't exist, and it's not a model that we foresaw and didn't write into the agreement. So that's the first thing. There has to be some definitions about what it is, because you can't really regulate anything or put fences around something that you don't have an understanding of what it is. So that's and a clear understanding between both parties, whether it be the CMPA or whether it's us, right? So we have to get some fences around it. And I think for me, when we're talking about residuals, which is the thing that, the way that people describe it, it's actually kind of an American term that we've borrowed. And our system is very different. One, because we have Canadian producers that we have to deal with, which is a different level than American producers. But we have a different system, and so we have to think of how both of our producers, whether they be Canadian or American, and we have to have a slightly different model. However, we have a model that allows for an advance, which is an advance is basically a prepayment on what the producer will end up using the residuals for. And the problem with it is been abused. And it's been shown over time that the producer can easily get around figuring out how to pay anybody.
Right.
Let's just
put it
right there.
Put it on the table.
We have a system that really has allowed for performers not to get paid for their use of their likeness, their work, in any time. Whether they get it right up front, and then they never see another cent from it. And that's just not acceptable in this day and age. That we have to be able to, especially now that we have shows that get dumped onto streaming services and then just come back out of nowhere and become a hit. We all know the story of Suits, 2023, which was a massive resurgence of that. Nobody got paid for that.
No.
Nobody, not even the Americans.
No, I won't say who or what show, but I have a really good friend whose show was, a Canadian show that ended up on Netflix. And I remember, sending her a message and saying, like, oh my God, I'm so happy for you.
Wouldn't that be great?
And the next time we went for coffee, she said, like, it's nothing. I will make nothing.
Yeah.
And
that's because of the
it's
advance.
heartbreaking.
And that there's nothing in the agreement that talks about what a digital streaming service is. We have no fences. We have no way to gather money from that use because it doesn't even exist in the agreement.
I really think this is so good and so important because over the last couple of years, getting to know how our union works and knowing that when we can point to language in the collective agreement, our staff representatives can go after and say, it says this here. And even as a member, you can say, actually, it says right here what I'm entitled to, what it costs for that, how I should be treated in this way or that way. So really, I think you've nailed the crux of this, which is like, it's about the language that goes into that collective agreement that then allows us to administer and make sure that people are being well compensated. Yeah. And I guess we don't need to go into AI, but I feel like that's just
it's the same thing.
It's all all together, right?
Yeah.
Like if you don't have that language and
you
then
have
this
no protections. You can't even talk about it. You can't even talk about it because it doesn't exist. If it's not in the agreement, it doesn't exist. And so you have to get that language in there. That is what SAG and AFTRA were fighting for. That is why they went on strike, is because they had to get that language in the agreement in order to be able to get any compensation for it in the future.
Absolutely.
We can talk about whether or not they got the kinds of protections that they really want, and people criticize them a lot for it. But I have to say, having been on the bargaining side, that just getting it into the agreement was a monumental achievement.
I think that's really, really important to acknowledge, because people will look at the after and say, oh, this isn't
they should have got that. They should have got that.
This paper didn't exist.
Yeah. The fact that it's even there is a huge victory for SAG-AFTRA, and they have a lot to be really proud of for the agreement that they gained.
Yeah, and a lot for us to learn from.
And it's also very I'm very grateful that they go ahead of us because
Yeah.
you know they really do create a model from which the rest of the world follows, and because they have the biggest teeth.
Well, they have the biggest bargaining unit. They have 160,000 members
who make a lot of money.
And others that are way below the line that are
way
not,
below the line.
but that they were able to go. These protections are going to be there no matter where and when and how much or
That's
how
right.
little you're working.
Yeah.
And then we have a pretty big bargaining unit in Canada. It's almost 30,000 members across the country. But our agreement doesn't just protect us, it even protects, it helps to create industry standards in and outside of the union to say, like, these are the basic minimums. But when we talk about basic minimums, like, the amount of labor or the amount of work that a performer does that's not accounted for.
Oh, wow.
I feel like there's one area that is this is like a deeply felt issue, is around auditioning and the changes that we've seen, and I want us to be able to go in a few different places. So I don't know if you have like initial thoughts, or if we want to talk about like what it was like that when you loved, if you ever had a good relationship with auditioning versus how you feel about it now. And
I think we have to acknowledge the fact that the world radically changed after COVID, and that in order to continue business, the era of self-tape emerged. It wasn't really something we weren't doing before. Self-tapes were always happening, but they weren't the norm, and they certainly weren't the first port of call. They were always the after the fact, or if you were in a different center or if you were out of town, you could send in a self-tape. But now they are business. They are the standard. They are not going anywhere, and they're going to remain, probably because of the economics. I mean, and probably even more than the economics, the convenience.
right.
I mean, we have a lot of American production here, and it is very, very convenient for American casting, American producers, American directors to view tapes at home. That they used to come up here to do auditions, right? That was a lot. And so I think there are great bonuses to self-tapes. I think there's a lot of pluses, but there's also a huge amount of negatives. And just like anything in our agreement, as I've been saying, which may be the theme of our discussion today, if it isn't in the agreement, it doesn't exist. And you can't put fences around something that isn't there. So we need better fences and better language around self-tapes. We need better understanding of how the audition process works now and how much different that has been than in the past. And so we just have to start working with what we have now and not thinking about, we just have to update. We have to update the agreement to be where we are. And that means we have to acknowledge that self-tapes are a reality, and that in order to continue to function with business as usual, we also have to acknowledge that the cost of casting has been downloaded onto the actors.
100%.
And that is unfair, but it is now normalized. And so the best way to acknowledge that time and that money is to give actors the kind of protections and fairness that they require in order to do those auditions properly. I don't know if this happens to you, but pretty much at about 3 o'clock on Friday, I go and sit at my computer and wait for the auditions to arrive, because the auditions come on Friday and they're due on either Monday or sometimes, if they're nice, on Tuesday.
Right.
And that is now my weekend.
Yeah.
And no other business my busiest work week when I'm an actor, if I'm not working, is doing auditions. That is part of my job. And I end up doing them now on the weekends.
Which is taking time away from
Everything.
not just everything. Yeah. It's like your time to you're balancing your whole
if you
life,
have a
your
family, if you have a part-time job, that is when actors do their part-time jobs.
Totally.
Is really on the weekends, because they're going to have less conflict with production that they would have to move or ask for time off. So weekends are really, really an important time for actors, and that has been something that's been taken away from them. So not only are they working or they're doing family time, but they're also now doing the auditions that are required on Monday or Tuesday.
Yeah, and I don't like to think that we're so separate from other workers, other unions, but there is something unique about being an artist and the attachment between artistry and creative work and labor and our employment. And like a weekend is a really important time for an artist to do their wellness practices, do their voice practice, move their body, so that you can go to set or go into an audition feeling grounded and actually give a producer, your employer, whoever it's going to be, a casting director, something you feel really good about.
Well,
right?
and if you have kids, it's a nightmare.
Impossible.
It's an absolute nightmare. Because
the stress on the family, having to do that at home.
Finding readers. I mean, my daughter has read for me far too many times. And my husband is my go-to reader. But, I mean, I think that's another thing that you just have to think about that you didn't have to think about before. Where are you going to do it? How are you going to be lit? What's your mic situation? What's your camera situation? Do you have the new iPhone, or do you have a really old phone? Like, you actually think about these things now that you never thought of before. We're suddenly editors, we're producers. We're now editing our self-tapes before we send them to our agents, Some people put titles on them. I'm like, I bless those people, but that's not me. But, like, there's a lot of hidden labor that has been added that we didn't have to do before. Then we also the page count is going up. They're just asking for more. And they're asking for, bigger body slates. They're asking for different kinds of positions. Like, anybody who's ever done a video game self-tape would know that
elaborate.
It's just so elaborate and ridiculous. Yeah. Absolutely impossible to achieve in your living room, in your house. And
I think one could also argue, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the producers say. I don't know what, producers you've worked for say. But, like, what truly, like, when we're talking about necessity, like, is that what's really needed in order to ascertain who the right person is for the job?
Yeah. I mean, that's always the biggest question. I mean, I often get self-tapes, and I look at the 3 scenes they've given me, and one scene is the same as the other scene. And you're like, is this really necessary? Like, I just find that we're at a point now where they just send everything rather than because they can.
Because, as you have pointed out,
because they can.
There's no language there.
No.
So and the convenience thing, I feel like convenience in this context is just has a little red flag emoji on it.
Yeah.
Anywhere where there's convenience, sure, self-tapes. I mean, when I first started acting, and self-tapes was like, it was like you got lucky that you didn't get to go in the room, but casting was willing to see you on a self-tape. We had no idea what would happen over that time period through COVID, and even before that, but specifically that period, and also with the change in technology, like you said, with not just iPhones, but like microphones, all the things, right?
All the lights.
So we weren't going, this is something to fix, because it actually felt useful to us. Once this convenience factor was realized by the employer, it feels like it began to, it's getting exploited.
And I think, one of the pieces about auditioning that I think I've heard the most from members is about just the level of respect. We used to have at least when we went into the room, you could have some indication from casting or whoever was there that you were being seen.
Yes.
And now we have this situation where we literally download our self-tape into a void that nothing ever comes back. And it's caused a real sense of insecurity. I have great friends who are agents, and I know that the burden has fallen on them to become the feedback loop for casting. Because casting no longer has a responsibility to give you anything,
or the capacity, because they're
seeing double, triple the people.
Yang, right? Like,
Yeah. It's a really interesting situation. And I think that the fact that we just don't have enough guardrails around auditioning allows it open for abuse.
And it feels to me like so far you guys are through the working focus groups to working in wages, that working in wages period is where the members get to come and look and slow things down and really kind of go, this actually needs to be here. And then sometimes there's probably things that sound in theory like they would be great.
Right.
And then maybe I don't know if you guys are in person or your digital, like Zoom hand goes up.
Oh, we're super Zoom people.
How will some of these things that you're working on actually work for you on set? Like, you want to fight for changes to the, residual model, fight for audition reform. And then there must be things that you sometimes go like, that's actually not going to work.
Yes.
And what's that like? You don't have to talk about what it is, but like, what is that like to kind of go, hold on, we need to...
Well, I think it's a really important distinction you're talking about because, we have an incredible bargaining team. We have an incredible group of staff. Our executive director and our president are incredibly knowledgeable. And we have an incredible group of staff who are there to help us figure this out. But we're actually the ones who enact the agreement. Yeah. We're the ones that live the agreement. And so that is my job, to be there to say, hey, that's not how it works. This is how it sounds on paper, but this is actually how it works. Yeah. When we talk about travel is a great example for me because I have spent quite a bit of time traveling in the last couple of years.
Which can sound really romantic and dreamy and like everyone wants it, but...
Oh my goodness!
Come on.
Yeah, there is really very little protections around travel for performers. Our brothers and sisters to the south have much better protections for travel than we do. They basically consider it a work day, and we don't.
Right.
It's a travel day for us, and you can travel across the planet and be required to come into work that day. Because there's just no protections for that. There's no acknowledgement that I'll give you an example. When I've been working on this show in England, and when I fly there, it's a 7.5-hour flight to London, then it's a 4.5-hour drive to Devon where I was shooting, and then they were asking me to come into work that day. I actually missed a whole day because it's 5 hours ahead. So by the time I actually get there, which is 15, 16 hours of travel, it's the next day. So they're like, you can come to work that day. I'm like, but I didn't sleep yesterday, because there's nothing in the agreement that says that I can't do that.
It's disheartening. It's disheartening to feel or to know and to hear that what feels like should just be common sense respect of people's well-being, that just because it's not there, nobody thinks to take care of.
The almighty production schedule rules, right? And so it doesn't matter whether I'm coming from, Bristol or if I'm coming from Canada. It doesn't matter. The schedule is the schedule, and actors will always suffer for the schedule, always.
And we're talking about our collective bargaining process, but we're also talking about the ways that a union agreement can define and make see progress that will impact actors to come for decades.
Yes. And again, if it's not in the agreement, that will also impact actors, right? Yeah. If we don't get the same kinds of protections that SAG-AFTRA got for residuals, AI streaming, and all the AI things, which are horrifying, then we will be in trouble. We have to get those in the agreement, and we have to do whatever it takes to get them in the agreement.
Yeah.
There's actually no option. And we have to start thinking of it that way, because I can't in my heart think that SAG-AFTRA went to a strike twice for these protections, and that we are just going to be able to sail through and expect that to happen for us.
Definitely not.
I think the message has to be, we have to get these in the agreement if we want some kind of protections in the future, because if we don't get them now, we won't get them.
Couldn't agree more. Very, very well said. And it sounds like all of these things together have become important. The stakes are high enough that not just you, but most people that I've talked to over these, interviews, I can feel bubbling up in you, like the need to be prepared to strike.
Yes.
And be strike ready. And I think that's part of what we're doing is like, let's really understand like what how high the stakes are.
Yeah. I don't think there's ever been an agreement, except for maybe when we got the internet in, that the issues have affected every performer category in our membership. Yeah. Every single member will be affected by residuals, and every single member will be affected by AI, and every single member is affected by inflation across the board. From background to stunts to intimacy to performers of all kinds, whether you be a day player, whether you be a series regular, it's all the same. This is foundational language that must be obtained for all of us, and it's not just because everybody's going to be affected by those three things.
Yeah,
everybody.
I can't wait for people to hear you saying that. I think it's going to be meaningful to people.
I hope so.
And inspire them.
I know that they believe it. When I talk to the members, I know they felt it. They felt the SAG strike hard.
Yeah.
We've been suffering under the lockout hard. It has been and just before that was COVID. I mean, it has been a very difficult number of years on our performers. But there's something that has caused a kind of resilience to our members. That's what I'm seeing in the membership right now, is this real sort of understanding and kind of a new awakening to the power of the union and the power that we have collectively together to fight for things that are going to advance us all.
Yeah.
That's where we're at the moment. And that makes me feel hopeful and positive, even though I know it could mean that we have to walk. But I feel incredibly positive about what we will obtain because of it.
Yeah, 100%. And the way that, the way that engaging in this process brings you through that feeling of like hopelessness, despair, apathy. Yeah. I mean, you've been an engaged ACTRA member, I think, for a long time, but a lot of people, and then that apathy meets this threat of, existential threat. And that hearing you and others talk about going through this bargaining process and coming out the other side and going, no, we're ready. I feel like that, to me, is what is going to give our members hope, who are, like you've talked about, on the ground, on set, at home, preparing to do the things and wondering, is anybody going to help me in my working life? Is this going to get better?
Yeah.
So I feel like that's just...
There's, SAG-AFTRA gained a lot in the last agreement, a lot. And I think that we have an opportunity to get some of those gains as well. Yeah. We need to see gains in per diems. When people ask me what is one of the big things, I'm talking about things that have not been looked at in a long, long time.
Yeah, what is it for per diems?
Oh, per diem, 17 years. 17
That's
years.
like a whole human.
Yeah.
Like a whole
it's
ready for university human.
It's the most ridiculous thing ever. You can't, I mean, I know the per diem structure pretty well because I've just been living through it, but you cannot buy an orange juice for the per diem you get for breakfast in England. Like, it's absolutely insane. There's a lot of offsetting costs to actors that are happening when it comes to wardrobe. Background people are constantly having to pay for things. Hair and makeup department. There's so much that's happening that the actors are offsetting costs for production. And it's just got to stop. Yeah. It's just got to stop. We also have a number of discounts in our agreements, and that is over. We have got to stop offering discounts. We are a grown-up industry now. Toronto, Montreal, BC, like all across Canada, we know what we're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have full-blown studios here. We don't need to be offering discounts to encourage production to come here. That doesn't need to be happening
And just
anymore.
because you love what you do and you feel like thrilled to play these characters or go to set and collaborate on all these things doesn't mean that you are open to being exploited. And we are, I think, very vulnerable to that because of how passionately, a lot of us, we're really young, like this was the dream.
Yeah.
Or you come to it and you're like, oh my God, I'm an artist, where can I go? And you find yourself in a union environment where you can actually go, holy crap, I could actually do my dream and raise a family or whatever it is that you want, travel when you have time, whatever the things are. But to see where we haven't quite kept up with what's needed.
We're never going to have, I don't think, a wage parity with our brothers and sisters of the South.
It's a totally different economy.
And I just don't think that's ever going to happen. However, there are other areas that we can get better background numbers. They got significant gains in background numbers.
Yeah,
significant.
And you, sorry, I didn't cut you off, but you started talking about discounts, and you also said something earlier around. We were talking about advance. So there's an advance, which we talked about. Then there's prepayment, and I don't know if we feel like that's something we should like. Is that an issue that comes up as well, or is it more the discount issue that you're hearing from members and your own experience looking at your...
I think across a bunch of our agreements, we have discounts for things and...
Incentives for the employer.
Incentives for production to remain with us, or please come and work with us, all that sort of stuff. We don't need it anymore. And those are the kinds of things we just have to say, yeah, we're done with that. That was nice for you. You're now here. Let's start playing like we mean it, like that we're both professionals here. I really think that it's important that we all hear this idea that apathy is going to be the death of us in this particular case. Actors are a really interesting group of people. We have agents who do all our negotiating for us. And so we actually are quite ignorant about our own agreements. And so that sometimes makes us scared because we don't actually know what's in our own agreements. The number of times I educate fellow actors on set, and I'm sure they'll all know this about me, about their call time, like when they're entitled to overtime. Like many actors don't even know that the workday is 8 hours plus 1 hour of lunch, and that your overtime starts at 9 hours. But many actors don't even know that. These are little basic things that they have just allowed their agents to do for them, and they haven't learned their rights that ACTRA has negotiated for them.
And then they don't know if a problem comes up. They may feel it. Well, that didn't feel right, or I don't feel like I have all my things. But they wouldn't know to call and report to the staff person or to Alistair or something and say, hey, this happened on set, and I'm pretty sure, and then which would then trigger a process that the staff could then help. So you're so right, like that apathy. But what's underneath it?
I think there's I don't know what's underneath apathy for anyone. I think time, hopelessness, a little bit of like, it would take a lot to get involved. I think people are maxed out.
Yes.
And I think it's really hard. I think that's why this is such a great thing, because we can talk about the issues and in a way that people will understand and maybe get engaged. If we can do anything, is to encourage people to just even learn the basic things about their agreement so they can advocate for themselves what already exists. Yeah. I'm sure many of the staff, the wonderful staff here at ACTRA Toronto would say they get calls about things that are already in their agreement every day. Yeah. Because people just don't know. And I think the more you know about your agreement, the more you know about what your rights are, the better advocate you'll be for yourself and for others on set. and in working situations where those things are falling apart. And then you'll be more informed when we start talking about very complicated issues like the residual structure and streaming. Oh, it's so complicated. And even I have a hard time understanding it.
The breakdown and stuff is complicated, but the feeling you get when you look at your paycheck or the absence of a paycheck
or you
is
get your
not
PRS,
complicated, right? You get your little 42 cents or whatever it is.
They used
that
to mail
feeling.
them. They used to mail them, and that we passed a motion when I was on council that you just stop mailing them if they're under the cost of a stamp. Please.
Please, you're antagonizing me. Leave me alone with this
please do not
3
mail
cent paycheck.
my 3 cents.
Totally.
Yeah, my favorite PRS check was 3 cents. Yeah.
Amazing.
I mean, I think we have to get engaged. There's never been a more crucial time to get involved with the union, even if it's just asking questions that you don't know the answer to. There's actually no stupid questions about this stuff because it's complicated. It's a big agreement. It's got a lot of stuff in there. But I think the more you know, the more confident you'll feel if we have to go on strike. And the more likely you are to understand that even though you are sacrificing yourself for your family and for your livelihood, it is for the better of all of us.
Yeah, it's for your family and for your livelihood.
Yeah, and that's really hard to know in the short term, but it's really vital to start to see the bigger picture here.
Incredible. What a pleasure.
I'd talk to you any day.
I love this. Jennifer Wigmore, thank you so much for being on the Reel Talk podcast here at ACTRA Toronto.
Anytime.
Come back again.
Anytime.
Thank you so much for tuning in. This has been Reel Talk. Please like and subscribe on our YouTube channel and follow us on wherever you get your favorite podcast.